This is 1020s, a podcast from 1020 Marketing. 10 episodes, 20 minutes each. Because meaningful marketing gets to the point.
Hello, welcome.
Hey, Bev, how are you?
I am good, Mark. This is our new podcast. Welcome to our podcast.
Do you want to lay out the ground rules so people understand what they're about to watch?
They're hard and fast ground rules. Well, the deal with this pod is that, as you just heard the nice lady in the VO say, it's 10 episodes, 20 minutes each, and that's how we want to keep it. If you can get, this is my feeling, if you can get one useful nugget of information or insight in just 20 minutes, imagine what you could learn over the course of an entire relationship about yourself, your brand, your customers, your life. Plus, people's attention spans start to dwindle after 20 minutes.
Indeed.
So we want to make sure we get them while they're like, yeah, you know?
So 20 minutes is not a long time, so we should probably jump into today's topic.
Yeah, let's do it. Well, people maybe know or maybe don't know, we're both in marketing, but another thing we have in common is that we are both creatives and we both started our marketing careers as copywriters. So I thought it would be cool to talk about the creative process.
Love it. Which parts would you like to explore?
Well, I think it would be interesting to look at what that looks like for each of us. It feels like a pretty rich area to explore just because in this industry especially, but I do think it kind of transcends industry.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Also, I've been reading this Rick Rubin book lately, and this is very stuck in my mind right now. It's called The Creative Act, A Way of Being, and it may or may not inform a lot of the things I say, but we'll find out, I suppose. I think every creative person should read it. It's fantastic. It's full of these little nuggets that are just so, you want to highlight every single thing, but you realize that's a bad idea. You don't want to highlight the whole thing.
I can't wait for you to send me my copy.
You can borrow my copy. It's already been read, so you can borrow it. The thing that stuck out the most for me is this idea that you need to be creating from a place that is true to you. So if you're not being authentic to who you are in the thing that you create, that will ring hollow. It's not gonna resonate with anybody. And for marketers, I guess that means true to you means true to the brand. So you're embodying the brand. So this is pretty important, I think, because it means that before creating anything, every brand needs to really do, I hate saying deep dive, but needs to do a deep dive into who they really are, like at their core. Figure out what drives them, what motivates them, really figure that shit out. And that ends up being the thing that informs who your audience is, really. Yeah, it's going to resonate with the people who end up being your audience.
Right. And I think there's a couple of things, a couple of directions that this can go in, right? So one is from a brand perspective, make sure that you have a really tight definition of who you are and what your brand is. Mm-hmm. And from the personal perspective of people working on the account or the creative output is that they've got to make sure that they're in it for the brand too, right?
Yeah.
They can't be in it for themselves like so many creative people sometimes are. They've got to be on brand. And I think there's a distinction there. And I think it's important to make because, you started off this discussion saying be authentic to you. And I think a lot of creative people might supersede their own needs for creativity and not do what's best for the brand.
That's a really good distinction to make, an important distinction. Because yes, if you are creating something for yourself, absolutely, it has to come from you. But when you are working for a brand, you are that brand. You are brand.
And the key word that you just said that is for, right? You're working for something. And the thing you're working for is the betterment of that brand.
You want to know as much as possible about the brand, about your audience, and you want it because you want everything to come across as authentically as possible because people can tell when you haven't dug deep enough. When you don't really know who you are, people can tell. You know what I mean?
100%. Well, 100%. And then there's, a little wiggle room for evolution, a little wiggle room for, figuring things out on the fly sometimes. Like when you look at some of the brand voices out there, I'm sure Wendy's, for example, didn't say to their social media team, say whatever you want to anybody at all times right from the beginning. I think they had to grow a certain confidence in that kind
For
of thing.
sure. I think that's an important piece to the evolution. Like people evolve, right? It would be strange. Right. When you stagnate, it's no good. You need to be able to evolve, but it has to be in an organic way, and it has to be in response to the climate of the time.
100%. And I think when you start to think of a brand as a real live living organism, mm-hmm. it's easier for you to understand that there could be evolution, right?
Yeah. There's something Rick Rubin says. I'm going to go back to Rick Rubin for a sec. The language he uses is the truth holds a charge, which I thought was a really beautiful way to say it. There's something about authenticity that holds a charge. You can't necessarily articulate it, but people can tell, people know when it's real. And I think that's just such an important place to work from.
That's actually really, really smart. The idea that, you know, I don't know, my mind is full of thoughts right now, but the basic idea is, you know, just kind of be yourself, right? And find a way for this thing that is basically kind of like, you know, some ways, you know, represents an inanimate object, right? The thing that you purchase in the end, right?
Yeah.
It needs to be personified in some way. And the more true you are to the values of whatever is behind that living organism, even though it's inanimate, you know, the more it sort of resonates with people because people can identify with it.
Yeah, it's the values.
Anything I just said made sense.
No, it does. The values are at the core of what that inanimate entity is.
Right. Right.
If those aren't there, then it just feels like just another inanimate object, I would say.
Right. Right. And it's interesting. We do some work for brands in the B2B space.
Yeah.
And I think it's very easy for brands in that space to, you know, just be what they are without having any personality and not really establishing a brand. And I think even more so in that space, it's important to be, you know, to have a personality, to have some, you know, branding behind you. But I don't want to divert too much, but it just got me thinking about that. That's
for sure. You want to leverage the truth of who you are, though, in that branding.
Yeah. So regardless of what space you're in.
Exactly. Right? So what I would like to ask you then is, what does the creative process look like for you?
So, you know, it's different, but there are kinds of like basic tenets in there that kind of hold true no matter what. Mm. One is I love a good written brief. And I know you and I have talked about that a lot. I like a good written brief. And I feel like a lot of times that's the first thing that gets cut out of the creative process because of time constraints or just dedication to or anything like that. But a good written brief is so important to just hold everyone and everything together. And the other part for me personally, when I'm in creation mode, so I guess I'm answering this in two parts.
Yeah.
The other part for me is like having ample time to think things through and marinate in my brain exactly what it is that the brief is trying to get me to output.
Yes.
I can't look at a brief and then come up with 20 brilliant ideas. That's not how it works for me. For me, it's like it could take days for me to solidify and clarify exactly how I want to approach the problem, right?
Yes.
So all I was going to say is like, and that could be for, you know, doing work. It could be for writing an email. It could be for how I want to talk to somebody about a specific thing. Sometimes I just need to kind of like do other things and let it sit there. And then all of a sudden, boom, the answer to me, the approach is there for me.
Yes. That sounds a lot like my process, which looks a lot like nothing. It very closely resembles doing nothing. But in fact, a lot of stuff is going on.
It's the Seinfeld process.
Yes,
it's a lot of nothing.
Yeah. But it's like there's so much activity going on that is imperceptible to anybody else, you know, like the forming of ideas. You can't, I mean, you can go and you can type and just whatever comes out. But to really form a coherent idea, a lot of completely invisible stuff needs to go on, and then magically something appears. It's like a complete act of faith, really, that you're going to produce something. Yeah.
That's so accurate to me. Like I think, a lot of people always say things like trust the process, trust the process. And the process in some ways looks like absolutely nothing is going
Exactly.
on, right? And there are points along the way where you actually might feel like nothing is coming, but yet something always comes, right?
It's true. It always does. Somehow it always materializes. And I don't know how, but it always does. And when you talk about trusting the process, that's something that I'm trying really hard to work on, transferring that skill to like my life. Because in writing, as a writer, I trust the process implicitly just because historically everything that I've done has started from nothing, right? And then magically something appears.
It's funny, and this might seem like a little bit of a tangent, but
yeah.
The notion as an entrepreneur, right? There's a notion that I always talk to people about, that it's like you got to feel uncomfortable. You got to feel comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yes.
Right? And I think that's similar to the creative process. You gotta trust the process, understand that, you might feel this like anxiety or this like nervousness that the idea is not coming, right?
Well, there's this uncertainty.
But the more you can, the uncertainty of it, and the more you can handle it, the more, you can get comfortable with that, the better the output will be, because it will come.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's taken me a really long time to actually arrive at that space of comfort, or really, I think, just to articulate it or put words to it. But that's really what it is. Yeah,
that comes
you're
with
right.
Experience. Yeah.
And another thing is the importance of taking space or distance from the thing that you are working on, like to let it breathe, to let all the ideas breathe or marinate, as you said.
Yeah.
And then to come back to it, and then you're fresh and it's fresh. And I think that's the distance is a really important element of the process.
But let's talk about the distance in another way also. Okay?
Yeah.
So the distance, I think, because the creative process and the creative output is such a highly personal thing, even though you have a brief, even though you have a brand, guidelines to follow, all that stuff, your mind is thinking all the time, and you put your heart and soul into something and you throw it out there. Yeah. And then you get feedback on that. You get feedback on it, right? So my experience watching this, and I think, I've been around in this industry for 10 years longer than you have, is I'm at a place now where I'm able to create distance from what I put in front of somebody so that I can positively receive their criticisms and feedback.
That's a really important point, for sure. I
don't think a lot of people handle the feedback well when they're.
I would agree with you. Even people who have been doing this for a really long time, I would say there are still people who do not handle it well because they personalize it, because it's something you create. So it's difficult to take it personally. But I think that I've gotten a lot better over time with just accepting that 80% of the stuff I do is never going to see the light of day, and that's fine. That's just fine. I'm just honing my craft.
Crazy.
I know, it's pretty wild.
That's another interesting point that you just say, which is that 80% of your stuff never sees the light of day. Okay, let's talk about that. Because do you feel that you're giving your clients enough choice when you go to them with ideas? I find that the creative process has become a lot about controlling the client rather than working with the client. And as a result, my experience working with, modern day creatives, because I'm ancient, is the idea that they actually think that less is better for the client. Mm-hmm. And, my upbringing in the creative space was very much so about having 3 ideas, which meant that I had to come up with 10 or 20 to get to those 3 internally before we, but I find that people fall in love with their first ideas too much.
That's my experience as well, in terms of you create 3 entire campaigns, like in a traditional ad agency, years ago when it was more, there are still agencies that do it this way, but you're creating like 3 full campaigns and you're showing them to the client. But I do see the value also in, I think when you're presented with too much choice, you become paralyzed a lot of the time. And I think because a lot of the clients do not come from a creative background, so it's more difficult for them to know what they want. And I think there's such a thing as too much choice,
Yes and no. I mean, I bet you that the agencies that are really moving the needle for their clients and winning awards for themselves are the ones who are showing more ideas, because to get to those 3, you need to have 20 or 30. And I remember as a junior, when I was working in Ottawa, we used to sit, the art director and the copywriter together, and with just a sketch pad, and we would write a stupid headline and a stupid, sketched out picture. And if that wasn't enough to get the idea across, then it went to the garbage. And then we would take what was left to our creative directors so that we could figure out where we're going to go. Right? It was never our call. There was always somebody else checking it.
There is. It's a lot. And sometimes that can be a barrier. Sometimes there's too many levels it's the same with the client side as well. Sometimes there's too many layers of people with the authority to say, yeah, that's great. Or, oh, we got to show it to like the person above me. Yeah. Like if this was just level 1. Now we have to go to level 2 and see if it's cool with level 2.
Yeah, I don't know. The best creative environment I ever worked in was basically 2 levels. It was the team that was working on the account, and then the creative directors who were making the final calls, and we would show it to the account team just to kind of get approval, and maybe they had a note or 2, but it wasn't about the idea, it was about the note, right?
Yeah.
And then we would go away. We would go.
Yeah.
Interesting.
For sure. But in terms, I'm curious about when you write anything now, or when you create anything now, is there anybody in your life that you go to most frequently for feedback, whose feedback you just, I don't know, it really, and anyone in particular?
It's funny. I tend to show my wife what I write when I need feedback, and honest feedback. I show my wife.
Yeah. Same. Well, no, I don't show your wife. I show my husband. It's the same with me.
Yeah.
He doesn't care about what I feel, so he's just very honest. He's not like protecting his feelings,
No, he's protecting what you're putting out in the world, which is protecting your feelings.
Yeah.
So he might say whatever, but he is ultimately trying to make sure that what you put out there is the best of you.
I know. And plus, he's not a writer, so it's kind of nice to get feedback from someone who's not a writer, from someone 100%. who is closer to the person who's going to be consuming what you're putting out there,
Yeah, 100%, 100%.
Where are we for time, Mark?
Well, I think we are a little bit over time, so we better wrap this up if we want to keep it to 20.
Yes, that's important. Keep it to 20.
So I guess we can wrap it up by saying thank you for listening. We are aiming to deliver 10 episodes a season, 20-minute episodes a season. That's the name 1020s, which also plays off of our brand name. And we'll be back, every week over the course of the next 10 weeks with a new episode. So thank you for listening.
Yes, maybe with not.
Yes. Yeah, well, thanks. Exactly. Thank you so much. We'll talk soon.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Bye.